Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for joining us. Well, Josh Shapiro takes office on January 17. What to expect in the first several weeks of his administration. But first, taking control of your health care. How important can that subject be? And we'll get to that after these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
All right, since COVID, there's been an increase, obviously, in the healthcare use by not just Pennsylvania patients, but patients all over the country. Joining to talk to me about that and how you can take control of your healthcare is Dr. Wilson Jackson. He's the president of the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Doctor, welcome.
Thank you, Terry.
I'll tell you, every time I try to make an appointment with my physician, it's like, okay, my family doctor and the specialists I see, well, when can you see me? Because there's just this huge surge in people who are seeing physicians.
No question, no question. There's an increase in demand, and some of that was pent-up demand out of consequences of COVID. And the second is just access. You know, we have the medical system, the medical providers are doing their best to kind of accommodate that, but there is a lot of kind of strain and stress on the system right now.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Well, let's talk a little bit about, obviously inflation has been a big factor in the economy, and we hear about it and talk about it in a lot of our daily lives. You know, we go into grocery stores, even pharmacies, wherever, and prices are going up if you can find the product. But costs also have affected patient care, correct?
It has, and if you look and compare healthcare costs over the past years and decades even, there's been a pretty steady rise of these costs, and some of those costs are being passed down to the end consumer, the end user, the patient, and that's really being felt by them. So that the public are not being impacted not only by rising costs for gas and food and other supplies to maintain their homes, but also the healthcare costs. Yeah.
And is there any sign that that's dropping a bit, that as inflation does look like it is on the decline, but it's still pretty high?
Yeah, I mean, healthcare is a slightly different market, if you will, in terms of compared to consumable use, durable goods and things. So inflation has impacted the cost of care, just buying products that are necessary for delivered patient care. Supply chain was another big problem that the healthcare system had. You know, we were backlogged of getting access to certain equipments and supplies. Yeah. But that has all driven up the cost and has trickled down to the end patient user.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people have health care insurance, but many do not. That has to also add stress and strain to the system.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even the deductibles of those who do have insurance is going up. And so it's impacting them, and out of their pocket costs are increasing. And this is really being borne by families who are forced to make decisions regarding, you know, kind of food and their medical care and other needs for their family.
Yeah. Well, moving on to another topic. One of the things I've liked about my, I call him family doctor, is the fact that if I have a problem, he immediately refers me to a specialist. And that's pretty important, isn't it? I mean, when you think about the actual care that gets delivered by specialists compared to a general practitioner, the practitioners are extremely important, obviously.
Yeah, no question. The primary care is essential. They're the centerpiece and the central figure of the kind of the play caller, if you will. But speaking personally, I'm a specialist. I'm a gastroenterologist, so I'm on the receiving end of those referrals. So patients need to be tuned in to the value of a referral, and they need to kind of engage their primary care, whoever's making that referral, and the importance of who that person is, what they're trained, their qualifications, their experience. And then going back to the economic issue, is there any additional out-of-pocket expenses incurred by that referral?
Yeah, I mean, the cost, as you pointed out, is extremely important, and it can be devastating to some folks depending on their financial situation.
Yeah. I mean, patients also need to speak up and advocate for themselves. They need to ask those questions that are important to them and on their minds. And you know, the referrals are a big part of our medical care, and they are a way of ultimately, hopefully, reducing costs, because if you get kind of good, efficient referral care, that can help better manage the disease.
Yeah. Now, should patients be? I mean, you know, obviously, obviously our viewers are patients. We're all patients. Even you're a patient.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just tough knowing who to pick and how to keep, you know, what to do when you have a situation where you particularly need a referral.
Yeah, there's, you know, some inherent trust in the relationship between the patient and their primary care physician. So they trust that they're making a good judgment and good referral. But it's also appropriate for the patient to ask the questions, you know, ask more about that referral and that specialist. Well,
we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk more about taking control of your health care, which is a particularly important topic, and we'll do that following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
All right, I'm talking with Dr. Wilson Jackson. He's the president of the Pennsylvania Medical Society, and we're talking about aspects of healthcare that concern all of us. And taking control of your healthcare is particularly important for patients. Is it my sense that a lot of patients, you know, defer virtually everything and don't raise a lot of questions?
At times there is. You know, patients need to own a lot of their medical problems, and they need they need to recognize their engagement and to work with their physician on how to best manage their care. You know, the vast majority of costs of our healthcare system, about 80% of our costs, are actually borne by about 5% of the population. So there's these super sick people who are needing really high-end costs of care. So things like compliance, things like appropriate follow-up, things like proper screening tests, really to reduce the downstream cost of care. So, for example, a long-term diabetic should get their regular visits with their ophthalmologist, check their eyes for retinopathy and anything that might impair their vision downstream. People with heart disease, advanced heart disease and heart failure need to really work closely with their managing physician in that specific area and how to apply their proper diet control of their disease, and in addition to medical compliance. So there's a whole range where the physicians, you know, kind of can make a recommendation, but it's also important for the patient to accept that responsibility and become compliant with those guidelines and recommendations.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, and it's also important, I think, when a physician makes recommendations, let's say, about future care, that you do your own research to try to, and this is all complex. I mean, and it's very complicated because most people, you know, just aren't familiar with you know, the interactions of healthcare, and the tendency is to accept a physician's recommendation about what you know, what they should be doing with their care.
Yeah, I mean, the internet is an absolutely terrific resource for healthcare for patients to use and access.
It's also scary, right?
But it can really lead down to some misconceptions out there. So I think it's important that if the patient does their own homework and research on whatever medical condition they have or recommended medical therapy, that they bring those questions to their primary physician so it can be put into perspective. You know, a lot of the mainstream information on the internet is appropriate and it's good, but you need a certain context, and that's where a medical trained physician can put that into context and where it applies. I mean, I see this virtually every day in my practice.
Of course you do, but
you know,
raise questions.
Yes, absolutely. And bring the questions to you when you meet with your physician.
Yeah. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in. This is a very important update. All right, what to expect from incoming Governor Josh Shapiro in the weeks after he takes the oath of office.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, January 17 is a big day in Pennsylvania when Josh Shapiro takes office as the new governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Joining me to talk about that and more is Angela Couloumbis. She's with Spotlight PA, and Gillian McGoldrick. She's with the Philadelphia Inquirer. Ladies, thanks for coming on. All right, Angela, I'll start with you. More than 300 people on Josh Shapiro's transition team. That's the largest transition team I've ever seen. And now he's appointing his cabinet officers as top advisors. And he looks like he's drawing from a wide array of experiences when he has picked these people.
Right. So one of the things that the governor-elect has said is that he wants to bring in a bipartisan, very inclusive cabinet when he gets sworn in on Tuesday. And so what we've seen so far is that he's bringing in, he's brought in a Republican to run the department of the department that oversees elections. He's also bringing in people with a lot of experience and that he's worked with, and that is Dr. Val Arkush out of Montgomery County to run the Department of Human Services. And he has stressed that he wants people with a deep well of experience in the issues that are going to guide the departments that he's appointing them to. Yeah.
You know, that's pretty important. I mean, past governors have tried the same thing. Not every governor has done that, but that's pretty important to have a well-balanced group of advisors. And the one thing I think a governor needs is to get a variety of viewpoints expressed to him. Not just what he leans towards or might do, but to have yes and no, and you have to have folks in your cabinet who are willing to put up their hand and say, no, Governor, that's a bad idea, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that the perfect example of that is with former Philadelphia County Commissioner Al Schmidt, who's a Republican, and yeah, he really was the focal point nationally with standing up to former President Trump and standing up for election integrity. And we asked Commissioner Schmidt and soon to be Secretary of State Schmidt how he would handle like a disagreement with the governor, and he said he's there to help and to implement the governor's policies, but he's also going to, and that he says that they align. They really want to strengthen democracy in our state.
Yeah. Well, let's turn. I mean, obviously, we're going to hear an inaugural address, and then shortly thereafter, he'll make a budget address to the Pennsylvania legislature, and obviously then, you know, goes to the people of the state. So what is it that, in terms of policy, that it looks like Governor Shapiro will push for in his first several weeks? Well,
he has talked a lot about wanting to continue the legacy of increasing funding for public education. He's talked about also cutting back and taking a really hard look at some of the regulations that the business community has for years said has been really has hampered them from growing. So I think that you can expect to hear that from him as well, and also pieces on the environment are going to be closely watched. I think the issue that he's going to face very quickly upon taking office is that he's dealing with divided government. Right. The House of Representatives is, in theory, going to be Democratic, but right now is at a complete standstill and is not even convening. Yeah, in the next segment, we're going to get to the mess. You framed it the mess, and I think that's right. He's also
a firm supporter of Pennsylvania's Abortion Control Act, and as Governor Wolf, his predecessor, who I think twice vetoed bills that would have changed that, that's another aspect of his administration. He's going to be a staunch supporter of abortion.
Yeah, and I doubt, depending on the mess in the Pennsylvania House, I'm not sure that any sort of efforts to bring up the Abortion Control Act again will make their way to the governor's desk again. Obviously, one of the legislature's favorite ways to surpass a gubernatorial veto at this time is constitutional amendments. So that's something that we'll be watching as we get into this.
Yeah, talking about that, Governor Wolf announces there's a special session. Oh, they tell me we're going to run to a break. We'll get to that subject and more after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, Angela. There's a special session of the legislature called by Governor Wolf for the purpose of approving an amendment to the Constitution that would extend the time frame in which folks who have been sexually abused would have to file lawsuits. And that's gotten caught up in what you have referred to and others have referred to as the mess in Harrisburg. How can you possibly explain that in a short period of time?
Well, very simply, the House of Representatives, the new speaker there, has said that, that's Mark Rossi, has said he will not do anything else before the House takes up this issue of creating a 2-year window in the statute of limitations for these now adults to be able to sue. They're time barred under current law from doing so. Then you move on into the Senate. This past week, what we saw is that the Senate took that issue and bundled it up with 2 other proposed constitutional amendments that voters could see on the ballot as early as this May. Those 2 constitutional amendments are far more partisan. They're far more complicated in the sense that they're controversial. And the fear is that as a result of that, there's going to be very little movement in the House now on voting on the 2-year window.
Yeah, but talking about the 2-year window, they have until, about the end of January in order to get it on the ballot for a vote. Constitutional amendments must pass the 2 consecutive legislative sessions, and then they go to the voters for an up and down vote. So if they don't get this done, and we don't even know when the State House of Representatives is going to return. Yeah,
that's a really good way to describe it, Angela. The thing is that we still have so many questions about how all of this is going to play out. Yeah. And the one thing that was very notable from Republican leader Brian Cutler was that as part of his deal to become as part of Rossi's deal to become speaker, was that all 3 of those amendments would be heard separately. So by the Senate putting them all together, it really does muck it up for Rossi, and it really looks like things are going to be at a standstill for a long time.
Yeah, among the 3 is an important one which Democrats are vigorously opposed to, and that's every time you cast a vote, you go in and the vote, you'd have to show ID. Now it's the first time. Go ahead.
That's right. So Democrats have opposed this historically, and there was an effort back in 2011 to actually, under former Governor Tom Corbett, to pass a new voter ID law that would do something similar, which is require identification every time you vote. That was found unconstitutional in the courts, and now here we are back at this stage in the game. It's slightly different. It would also apply to mail balloting, which in this case going forward, and that is very controversial with Democrats. And as things stand right now, a lot of Democrats, what we saw yesterday in the Senate, a lot of Democrats refused to vote for the entire package, which included the 2-year window that they support because of this voter ID requirement.
I'll tell you, all of this and what's going on in the House in particular where you know, the Republicans are now calling on Representative Rozzi to resign as Speaker because he won't change his registration from Democrat to Independent, is at the heart of what's causing this so-called mess. But this does then have a relationship to the incoming Governor Josh Shapiro, who has an agenda, and if the House remains in this turmoil where they can't do any regular business, they may attempt to do, and where the Republicans that now have an edge, 101 to 99, but after there are 3 vacancies, after the vacancies are filled, after the special elections on February 7th, the Democrats will control. How does the governor, how would anyone, forget Governor Shapiro for a minute, make any sense out of all this?
Yeah. The thing is that he had been thinking he was coming into a House that he was going to be able to at least get some of his policy proposals through with a democratically controlled House. He thought it was going to be and Democrats at large thought it was going to be a history-making opportunity with Democratic leader Joanna McClinton rising to the speakership, the first woman, the first black woman to ever take
Philadelphia,
that.
right.
Yeah, from Philadelphia, yes. And that he thought, and many Democrats thought, that this was going to be like a new day in Harrisburg, but now it seems to be like the worst of its dysfunction is at play in the House right now.
Yeah. And one of the questions that I think is going to play out is, and I've been asked this myself, is the role of the incoming of Governor Wolf, I'll put it that way, Governor-Elect now, in dealing with this. But that's another branch of government, for God's sakes, right?
Well, yes.
What's he supposed to do?
Well, I think the one thing that Governor-Elect Shapiro has is that he has a lot of experience himself.
Good point.
He served in the legislature for almost a decade, and he knows how to negotiate in those areas, whereas previous governors came in without that experience.
Right.
And what you saw in those governors' terms in the first few months, and in some cases first few years, was sort of an inability to really understand how to negotiate with the legislature. Josh Shapiro has that. He's going to figure things out. It's going to take time, and I think the public's going to have to kind of come to terms with the fact that it's going to be a little messy for a few weeks.
Is that what you're suggesting? Yeah, well, I want to thank you for this update. It's very, very confusing for those of us who follow it, and presumably, it'll get straightened out. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.